Hi, Jonathan. Hi, Jeff. Good to see you.
Angus,
Hello.
Jonathan, lovely gentlemen.
Jeff,
Nice to be here again on a Friday afternoon or Friday morning for Jeff over in the States there. So I've put together another little slide deck, and as has been pointed out to me, I didn't even bother to put the title of this chapter in there, which seems like a bit of an omission, should we call it? So, what was the title of this chapter? It was "Are There Limits to Cognition?" And already there, we can begin to start the conversation because we agree but we disagree at the same time. So, Jeff, Jonathan, take yours, the starting gun. It's like, are there limits to knowledge? Bang, off we go.
No. All right, that was great, guys. We'll see.
Okay, covered that one.
question. To be entered into. So, can I know as a blue bottle fly knows?
If you had several thousand eyes,
I don't. Can I do
eat shit.
I don't. Every day I'm forced to. But that's the question. So, can I? There may not be any limits to knowledge. There may not be any way in which I cannot answer a question I can put. But I don't have the question of a blue bottle fly. Is it possible to have the question of a blue bottle fly? In which case, I wouldn't know their knowledge.
So,
well, can I? You know.
Jeff, you said a decisive no. I'm more in agreement with you there. So give us your reasoning.
Actually, I don't mean no, but I don't mean I don't mean.
You don't know what you mean.
No does not mean no for me. I'm coy that way. I don't mean no, and I don't mean yes. I cannot say if there's limits to knowledge. At least if it relates to the concepts presented in this book up to this point. I can say that for sure that we must do away with what our society is based on, which is the thing in and of itself, which is a completely empty concept out of which our whole society operates, I would say, at least the one I live in. So I can say that false limit to knowledge of a made-up concept of reality, it certainly limits knowledge unnecessarily and truncates what we call reality. That's a problem. That's a big problem, and it's a problem that we're seeing play out in our in the hot mess that is our world right now. So I'll say that. I don't know if I can say that as relates to the fly, I can say that's a mathematical problem. Like that's basically if I could situate myself from the point of view of the fly. In other words, if I could perceive
mathematical and qualitative.
If I could perceive or geometrical or anything that has to do with my place or my sensitivity of perception, say.
But it's qualitative also in the sense sorry, just to interrupt, because the place, mathematically, that maybe we could, adjust our organs to do that. But then there's also the quality of the consciousness of the fly, the questions it asks.
Well, that's what I was getting to. So the perception on one side could be enhanced, say, to some degree, so that I could potentially. There's no reason to say that I couldn't, from a sort of seems impossible when you say that, but there's no reason I couldn't see from the point of view of the fly necessarily. There's no reason to think that. But it seems impossible from a certain point of view. 1 second. Come here. Yes. Sorry, I just saw my son for the first time this morning, so I didn't need to say a proper hello. So here's where the rub is for me. relates to this. So Steiner claims that there are spiritual hierarchies that don't incarnate as human beings, right? Or have not, or maybe they will, maybe they won't. And there are three realms of those hierarchies, and then there's a holy trinity that sort of issues forth through the narrative of truth, goodness, and beauty, say. But I don't perceive any of those, and nobody can prove to me that that realm exists. And I would suggest that if that realm exists, I could see through the eyes of a fly. But
How?
because I would be because I'll give that a quick crack. If I were able to develop my cognitive ability so that I could stay in a state of intuition, say. Now, I don't know what that means exactly, because this is a concept that I have yet to achieve myself. So I can't even see through the eyes of my potential self, let alone the eyes of a fly. But if I were, if intuition, if thinking is the universal process, and intuition is the way in which that universal process arises, uh, um, then I would be at the gates of the origination of species, say, or the origination of the eyes themselves of a fly. Then I could. That's plausible.
Hmm.
In a gradation of knowledge, it's plausible that I could reach that state. But all of that presupposes an almost thing in and of itself spiritual realm. So that's where I'm at with this chapter.
Yeah.
I'm skeptical about the claim that there is no limit to knowledge, though I know he makes it later on, but not in this chapter.
So about the fly. So I think that what you're saying, I go along with, and I think the key point is the fact that I'm asking the question: can I see as a fly? And if the answer then is to make me into a fly, even if just for a moment, then that question is answered. However, then I would say, what is where is the, so where could I obtain a memory of that experience? So if I am I, and the fly has its own substantial being that is not me, and and turned into a fly for a moment to experience as a fly does, is there a manner in which then, I can recall that to answer my question, can I see as a fly? And I think to say if that was possible, we have to, and I believe this is implicit what you're saying, or perhaps you've actually said it, Jeffrey, is that then one would have to be at the same time, one's eye, as it were, would have to be at the same time the source of me and the fly, for there to be a community between that question and that answer.
Adding another layer to the pictures you're presenting there, living in the world paradigm that we currently live in, or the dominating one, consciousness is a result of matter. So from that perspective, from that theoretical perspective, so like my brain can never enter into the consciousness of a fly. But as we are become increasingly aware reading this book, that is a long way from Steiner's idea of what consciousness is, and I'll no doubt be drawing in from other sources here when I try to present this idea. But I think it's useful in understanding how one might arrive at the idea of there are no limits, even though we recognize there might be physical, sensorial limits, perceptual limits that can be stacked on top of that possibly infinite possibility. And so the key idea is if consciousness, rather than being an emergent property of matter, if instead it is an essence unto itself, from that perspective, also the consciousness that's currently living in me is in no way dependent on my body for its existence. It chooses to live in my body and so like using the senses to experience the world and experience living in a body. But if we are capable of freeing ourselves from the link between consciousness and the material, which can be viewed as one of the purposes of the exercises that you can do, is like forms of meditation, contemplation, concentration. These are all tools to make thinking consciousness less matter bound. Okay, so the picture that becomes a possibility in my mind is that consciousness becomes untethered to one specific body, and is capable of living in other, if it so chooses. We've got this funny word called love in the English language, which is like a vague attempt to experience the world from another person's perspective. And so if that is a true world picture, a true description, that consciousness lives in a body and is not permanently bound to the body, then just on that basis alone, knowledge, limits to knowledge, they become expanded far, far beyond what we are capable of imagining now. And a simple idea for how that would be is like, the consciousness, which has become an individual entity, is capable of living the life of a fly. Why it would want to do that, that's another matter, but theoretically it's possible, whereas it's not even theoretically possible if we have a materialism that's forming our idea of how reality is made up.
So what you said is excellent, and it leads one to the edge of a reality that's possible. In other words, that's plausible. But do you experience consciousness other than in your noggin, in your own frame, or is that a claim that consciousness is not local to you? Like, you know what I mean? Like that. Like, you would have to experience a realm of consciousness or a state of consciousness that has you other than yourself.
Yes.
Right. And so that's plausible. And anthroposophy is built on the notion that I am that. I am. That I am the other in reality, and I only separate myself through this what's described in these first 7 chapters. Essentially, is what I'm experiencing in this chapter is, well, I'm exhausted because now I'm sitting at the gate of my separation from the world. I haven't crossed that threshold in relationship to this book thus far, and but what he does do in this chapter is is establishes the absolute and complete ridiculousness of the thing in and of itself as a reality, and that it is utterly implausible. Yet our whole society is based on that feeling that that's the reality.
Yeah.
Or then really it is. I mean, it really is, and the feeling is predominant, as if it were the only way to think about things.
It's a reality which says, which shows the foolishness of my question, because it's irrelevant what consciousness of a fly is like, because that's not a question we need to ask ourselves. So the question, what is the thing in itself, is irrelevant, because even if there were a thing in itself and this whole universe is just like hanging from the strings of some evil demon or something, if we can never ever know that, and it's never our experience, it's completely irrelevant. It's not a question to set oneself. Do you know what I mean? It's just nonsense. So the point of the chapter, essentially, just to quickly finish, is that knowledge is answering questions we have. And the questions we have are the ones that are set by, our position and our quality, our character, our consciousness in life. Anything beyond that is just stupid, foolish irrelevance. And to sort of chase after those other things is a vast deception, distraction, and a fool's errand.
Mm. We'll dig even more into that when we look at metaphysical realism a little bit later. But I wanted to argue, Jeff, that we all have, it's like to a limited extent, experienced the intuition that you said you hadn't had. Because when I pick up this book and I look at all of those black and white, that's that white page, a slightly creamy page, and these black letters on there, they are changing the content, my inner life. These dead things on pages, they are transforming, they are creating experiences in my thinking. There might be frustration when I don't understand. There might be joy when I come to a particular part where I feel like I've moved forward in my understanding. But none of those sensations, understandings, pleasures, displeasures would exist for a dog, or we'll stick with our fly for this particular video. For a fly sitting on this book, it would never, ever, ever have the same experiences all of us can have when we pick up this book and we try to recreate in our minds what was living in Steiner's mind in the early 1890s,
yes,
when he wrote this. Of course, we recognize fully that we haven't fully permeated, so we haven't got a fully fledged intuition of what he was presenting there, but we're slowly inching our way forward, aren't we, as we become clear about certain concepts within this big idea that he's presenting. So I think, yeah.
I appreciate that. There were two things, but I don't remember what the second one was suddenly. But as relates to experiencing intuition, oh yeah, I definitely do experience intuition as exactly the way you're describing, in the way that I am altered, and the way in which I alter myself through my conceptual life, say, and that which I observe, and that which I come to love, and that which I am not a master of, and that which I am a master of, and all of that. The question is, does that intuition give me anything of the world other than myself? And nowhere in this chapter is that established.
What do you mean? But what do you mean by intuition? What are you intuiting?
I'm intuiting the alteration. I'm intuiting myself as a transparently self-determined person.
Yeah, but that was the lesson of the last chapter.
But I would need to know the way in which the percept of the thing that I'm observing is transparent, and that would be the knowledge that we're talking about, and we have not established that can be transparent as I can be transparent as a subject of my own perception.
But Jeff, I think you're asking a thing in itself question, because that is the lesson of the last chapter, which is that there is a percept, there's a tree or whatever, and then there's how that modifies you, and there's how you modify yourself with the concepts, and they meet together in you. But and the tree just is, and then the modification in you observe. But are you saying the tree is not, or you're not sure if the tree is not?
I'm saying I don't have any reason to think that I can know anything about that tree.
But the
I don't have any reason I can't. I shouldn't be limiting my knowledge, because there's no. I think this chapter establishes there's no good reason to limit knowledge. There's a lot of arguments for it, but they're what they're rooted in ultimately are axiomatically problematic as relates to what they think reality is. But I have to I'm not taking a thing in and of itself of the spiritual world view, but in a certain sense, I practically have to if I'm going to investigate the possibility of extending my consciousness or expanding my consciousness or making my
Yes,
sensitivities more profoundly sensitive and my intuition more profoundly knowing, and
yeah.
actually uniting the percept and concept, not in a cognitive operation, but in an originating life. And I have that example with me, but uh, knowing another is that would have to be equally transparent to the way in which I'm
Yeah.
altered by it.
But then that comes back to the question: can you experience the being that tree? Isn't that what you're asking? Because the tree is presenting itself to you in one way, and you're saying no. But what are you really? And you want to be that tree. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, the tree is your example, so I'm not particularly
Whatever
identifying.
example.
Yeah,
Give
I'm
an
just saying
example.
that the way in which I'm transparent to myself is not available to me as relates to others.
Well, give me
To
an example of
to
another.
the
A
tree,
table or
Angus,
yeah.
Jonathan,
Okay.
right?
Exactly.
The whole
But
feeling life, the whole mental image life, the whole experience of all our memories, all of these
I
type of things. I think that's what you're referring to, isn't it, Jeff?
I'm referring to the that side of the existential operation, yes, of existence, yes.
so but then so you're seeking to sort of intuit as Angus, which may be possible. Do you know what I mean? There may be a point where you can intuit as Angus. Is that what you're asking for?
I'm not asking for anything, I suppose. I'm just saying that there's it's plausible that I could be Angus, but it's not established that I could be Angus or that and so I would need to be Angus in order to know Angus. So in other words, I would need to do what you left out of that description, Angus, which is to experience myself stepping out of my own consciousness into another consciousness, or a oneness of consciousness, and it's all plausible. Please, I'm not saying that it's not, and I'm not saying that there's a uh, there's not a reality that is experienceable that is at once me and the other, because I've articulated this over and again, like to people, and to like, this is great, this is like the don't you see that we are one and we're the multiplicity, but I'm only one because that's all I can experience at this point in this, and I can't prove anything else to you.
But
I think you're also highlighting a point of conversation that came up last week, which is really important, Jeff. It's how we might confuse mental images for intuitions and vice versa, without reigniting that whole conversation. We have to be extremely careful about when is this just like my experience that I've sort of my own mental representation that I've made of it, so like through my own subjectivity, and when is it something that I've experienced beyond my subjectivity, and where I'm actually genuinely able to see something from somebody else's, or a new point of view, a new perspective. It's complicated. It's very complicated.
well, in terms of Angus, if I may continue the example of you, Angus, is he's already presenting himself to us through our perceptual ability, and then everything that isn't generic of Angus, when he utters an original thought or writes down an original thought and we read it, then that, as we intuit that is Angus. Do you know what I mean? We might not be able to get all of Angus all together at one and the same time, but given
When we look
that,
at a piece of artwork, what do you think, Jonathan? We can also intuit a little bit of you and what was going on inside you when you created this picture. I think that's what you're saying, isn't it? It's a little bit. We're not claiming it to be the whole, but still.
If that's characteristic of Jonathan, then in as much as you intuit what's going on there, that is you're intuiting Jonathan.
Yeah. There's a I don't know if I've mentioned this guy in passing before, a guy called Walter Russell, really interesting guy, But I remember hearing it expressed by him extremely clearly once that all art is an embodiment of a person. And if we can enter deeply into that art, we can come into contact with the essential being that created that piece of artwork, being music, literature, poetry.
Speech, just normal speech.
And exactly.
Yeah.
These aren't 100% intuitions, but they are giving us indications of, this is somehow like represents a little bit the essence of the person's nature when I read.
Yes,
When I
and
read or see.
we have to be careful not to rarefy ourselves and say Jonathan is this like like an atomistic thing that is there forever and evermore. So if I'm not rarefied like that, then even if you only intuit a passing glimpse of me, that's all I have of me too.
Yeah. And in that sense, so just going back to the image. So if I'd only spoken to Jonathan once, and this is all I knew about him, that would be a mental picture of him, which would have some sort of relation to him, but it would be an extremely one-dimensional picture of this totality that is the artist that created this.
But is that totality, does it end at the end of a life and begin at the beginning of a life? Because we're trying to stress the point that it's an ongoing thing. So you're never going to get a rarefied it that you can hold in your hand and say that is it. It's not always an ongoing thing. So we can intuit into that and partake in that.
Sounds like a living idea to me. What you're describing there. Oh, sorry, wrong way. Okay, already here we're touching on. What I thought I would read this text and then you guys reflect on it and I'll jump in afterwards. Okay. So the key thing here is, what is the world of appearance? So we have established that the elements needed for the explanation of reality are to be taken from the two spheres, perceiving and thinking. As we have seen, it is because of our organization that full, total reality, including our own subject, appears to us at first as a duality. The activity of knowing overcomes this duality inasmuch as, out of the two elements of reality, i.e., out of the perception and out of the concept produced by thinking, it joins together the complete thing. Let us call the way in which the world approaches us before it has gained its rightful form through out-knowing activity, the world of appearance. In contrast to the entity composed in a unified way of perception and concept. Then we may say that the world is given to us as a duality, and our activity of knowing elaborates it into a unity. Yeah. We don't need to say any more, do we? World of appearances.
I think what we can say that what he's done and is doing here is he's promoting a worldview as a as an important step in a process of coming to reunify with the world. Say that we are dualistic, that we experience the world in a dualistic fashion. There's no reason to concretize dualism as a worldview. There is reason to pursue monism as a worldview because of what it potentially can provide. But there's no potential. The importance of worldview is key here, I think. And coming out of Riddles of Philosophy, this is just occurring to me. Coming out of Riddles of Philosophy, one could argue almost that he was trying to get rid of worldviews altogether. But they're necessary, at least in our age, when we have a duality, to get beyond ourselves. Without the idealistic potential, there's never a moment of there's not well, at least limit the possibility of transcendence. We might have some tragedy visit us and have our worldview blown apart and have to reconstruct a worldview that has us then in a different state of consciousness. But assuming that we're all healthy and moving along, and the necessity of a worldview that is held by every individual, so it is a mental picture. So when mental picture becomes a monistic worldview, then I would suggest then the mental picture is a process of transcendence, potentially, at least. So this is
I don't
this is
understand.
my holding on to the mental picture for a little while longer, at least.
What do you mean a mental picture becomes a worldview? Can you explicate that?
Well, if a worldview is a conceptual framework through which we posit the world exists, say, or the way the way that we want to best orient ourselves in the world and make the
Doesn't have to
decisions
be.
to create an educational system and to farm and to if we're going to
Yeah,
take these
but it doesn't have to be
into
that. A worldview can be the view of the world as it is, not as we want it to be.
right. And tell me what your worldview is.
It's everything I perceive and what I'm able to think.
And that is that a worldview that your fellow people can base their life on, or is that just
In as
your
much,
worldview?
in as much as we're sharing a room together, or a town together, or a bigger place together, and in as much as we are able to communicate, and our actions seem to come into accord and make fruitful things.
So just broadening this idea of sort of limits to knowledge. One of the frustrating phrases that you can hear in conversation is, "We'll never know." Well, that person that just made that statement, they're making it out of a world conception. And what if they're completely wrong about it? Let's say it's like, I don't know, let's say there's some controversial story in the media, without being specific here. There's a controversial story in the media, and that one person presents one side of the argument and another person presents it's like a completely different version. And the other person wants to reject what you're saying. So they'll say, "Oh, but we'll never know the truth." Well, we might never know, but it's not theoretically impossible to know it if you had a bunch of sincere,
What is the truth?
exactly, as a bunch of sincere, investigative journalists who really burrowed into it, and they hadn't been bought and paid for by various interests where really they were interested in the truth. Absolutely, we could find that.
But what is
and
the truth?
this is a microcosm of what I think one of the aspects of this question is: people who say there are limits to knowledge, they are assuming things that if they had a better understanding of the relationship between knowing, the activity of thinking, and perception, if they had a correct understanding of that, they'd never make such a stupid statement. But because we are so unconscious of how our thinking is related to our understanding of the world, because we've got this subject-object divide as we normally experience life and thinking, then we make these crass assumptions that there are limits to our knowledge. And this is one of the things that Steiner is walking us through in these first 7 chapters, is we need to reassess what thinking means for us in relation to knowing the world. And this is one of the this is for me one of the beautiful fruits of it, that I feel. So when he makes a crazy statement like it's stupid that the tree outside us, it's a false view of reality. What he's doing is he's forcing us to see the world from another perspective that is also valid, but that adds a new dimension to our ability to understand the world, and at the same time resolves this unknowability question.
So and the point which this chapter makes particularly is that when someone says we may never know the truth, then the question is, what is the truth? And if by the truth, you mean a rarefied something that you can have and hold, and that's the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, that's nonsense. What the question is, is the question we have now? Do you know what I mean? What is the truth we're looking for now? And then you have a question, and then it can be answered, and that is knowledge. If we don't know what the question is, we're never going to know what the truth of that question is. So when you say we can never know, then the sort of next question is, well, what are we trying to know? Break it down. What is it? What is the step we want to take? So what do we need to know? And then I think everyone can then agree, oh, right, okay, yes, we can figure that bit out. And then we take the next question. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to know what knowledge is. I know that there are limits to knowledge.
Knowledge about what?
I know there are limits to knowledge. Existentially, operationally, I can describe to you the limits to knowledge. They're not absolute limits. They're just boundaries that can be crossed, right? That's my contention, and it's only a contention, by the way. I don't have proof of that. But
that's the point he's making in this chapter, isn't it, Jeff?
But what
yes, but I can speak to
possible.
your question. What is knowledge? I can speak to it. Existentially, I can speak to it. Knowledge is the conjoining of percepts and concepts, not as just a cognitive act, but the actual thing that you're perceiving and the actual conception join in a unified act. Is that possible? It's possible in relationship to me, but I can't say yet whether it's possible in relationship to the outer world. I can't say it in any particular object, or any particular person, or any particular thing. You give me the example, and I'll show you the ways in which I'm limited.
I'm going to give you an example Tulip to move the conversation on, because we're still going to be talking about the same thing here. Because this is another interesting point that he shifts our attention to the relationship between that which is can be known and what actually causes this. Is there an obligation to know, or is it something that we do out of our own interactivity? And in this, I'll just read it to things that demand no explanation, and then give a little picture. And I think this might move us forward in our conversation as well, but slightly different direction than it was otherwise going. It follows from the concept of the activity of knowing, as we have determined this concept to be, that limits to knowledge cannot be spoken of. The activity of knowing is not a general concern of the world, but rather is a business which the human being has to settle with himself. Things demand no explanation. Okay, so when I read this part in the book, I like to try and draw little pictures to make sense to myself. I drew a picture, and there was a speech bubble coming out of this. I drew a picture of a flower, and out of the imaginary mouth of this flower, let's see, here it is. You can see this is the picture, and it says, "Tell me what I am. Sag mir, was ich bin." Okay, tell me what I am. But a flower never does that, and there's nothing in the outside world that says, "Tell me what I am." Nothing in the outside world obliges us to have any knowing relationship with whatever percept is being given to us. But nevertheless, we do want to know what it is. What are the forces moving in this flower, creating it, sculpting it? That's what we're doing when we're looking for knowledge. We're trying to meet up with the essence of what it is that we're seeing. But be careful. It's always an inner drive to what is that? And this is this open secrets thing aspect. So Goethe's phrase is so like nature reveals nature has open secrets. I can't remember the exact. Somebody might manage to pull it whilst I'm talking here, but Goethe has this phrase that said, like, nature is an open secret. She's continually revealing to us, but never telling us, type of thing. And it's this cryptic idea that all of these mysteries are laid out in front of us, but until we ask the question or the questions, we'll never find out. But once we answer questions, then the thinking activity, when we observe the percepts, like Matt's picture in the talk yesterday, we recreate the living processes of the flower in our mind, and gradually we get closer and closer to this being that is creating the flower. And that's all because of our desire to unite what is missing when we first see the world through straightforward perception. So we have these color percepts, and we have these form percepts, and we have different shades and different shadings and tones and structures there. But we're not satisfied with just those concepts for describing it. We want to understand how it comes into being. And initially, we can't do that. But over time, we can.
Yes, and this is the point, because I was saying be careful, because it's in the question that knowledge will arise. And I was saying be careful because you mentioned getting to know the essence of the flower. What does that mean? Can you ask of a flower, what is its essence? You might need to take some steps back and ask a few questions earlier. So to Jeff, what I would put you, if you want to know something in the outside world, the outer world, I believe you put it, then what is your question to the world? Because if your question to the world is, what are you? That's kind of, it is what it's presenting itself to you. But then your question is, so what are you in relation to me, say? Or, what are you in relation to that other thing over there? Or do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You need a question.
I mean, yes, of course I see what you're saying. I think it's an important step in knowing the world is to be able to ask a question. And knowing the world also has answer associated with it. So there's a process of unifying the percept and the concept that I do within myself, but I'm not sure it's.
Yes, but yourself isn't separate from the world. Yourself is also.
That's what you say,
well.
but that's not my experience.
So where's the dividing line between you and the world? How can you possibly know the world if you are separate from the world? Where's the dividing line?
Well, right. That's the question. Do I know the world at all? I know myself.
But you say, but you can see a table in front of you. Is that the outer world?
As long as it remains a percept, yes, and I'm leaning on it right now. So
how do you know you're leaning on it? Because you thought about it.
Because I can feel my arm having an indentation in it when I'm pressing against it, and my knee is underneath a drawer, and it's getting pressed upon there. And I have.
So is this not the world?
Sorry?
Is this not the world?
It's me perceiving the world outside my physical frame, outside my frame of consciousness. I'm not inside the wood grain of the table, or I mean, this is absurd at a certain point. Where I experience the world as percept and concept. I have not unified them, and to make a claim that I have would be absolute hubris.
I don't understand what you're saying. Because as soon as you say table, haven't you unified a percept and a concept?
I'm inside a house. I'm looking out the window. And I can see from a certain framework that the window provides, in part, a limit to what I can perceive. But I don't wish to get sidetracked on the word limit there. I see a magnolia tree, and I see a sandbox, and I see a swing set, and I see the other house out there. Yeah. I'm inside this house looking out, and that's what I see. So my experience is that's the outer world. Are you saying there's no outer world for me to experience? Because unless I'm able to have the experience, say that that David, well, let's not go there because I don't even know what his experience
Jeffrey,
is
my
necessarily.
question to you is: where's the division between you and the outer world? Obviously, there is.
It depends on what sense I'm using.
I'm
Depends
pointing
on
out
what sense
that
I'm
you
using.
go over it.
If I'm using my eyes, then the boundary is
Yeah.
is the
And how do
boundary
you,
is
yeah,
that through which I'm
yes,
looking.
yes. And so
If I'm
how do
using
you
my
connect
ears,
those
it's
two
that
things?
through which I'm
Yes,
hearing.
yes. Okay, you've established that. But how then do you connect you to the world?
Jonathan, I'd
I'm
like to bring this conversation
I
back
don't
to
know.
how is this related to nature's open secret? Because what my experience listening from
Jeff's
the
saying that
outside
nature
is
is.
that you're going around in circles, and that's a good conversation to have. But this video is about, and this
Yes,
particular
but
part of the video
this
is
is the
about nature's
point.
open secrets.
Yeah.
So
Okay,
I'm going to
I
suggest.
understand you want to go on. It's just the point is that Jeffrey seems to be saying that nature has no open secret and nature's closed to him. And
It's not what I heard.
That's not what I'm saying.
so what's your problem? I don't understand.
I've got no problem.
Okay,
I only
Jonathan,
have questions.
I think the problem is that so I haven't experienced what you said about nature not being an open secret when Jeff's been talking about. You obviously have. So instead of asking him questions, tell us how you experienced his words.
So yes, okay, thank you. So I understood, Jeffrey, you said that how can I know nature outside me? Is that what you said? Is that your question?
I don't know what nature means. So if I'm
The
talking
outer
about
world.
right, right, I can tell you how I
Okay.
could know it, but I can't tell you that I do.
Okay. Okay. I guess so. This is it. This is the thing. But we can shelve it now. I'm happy to shelve it, Angus, because I understand you want to continue.
Okay. But obviously, there's a lot there to talk about. But we'll move on. Okay. So metaphysical realism. We got moving graphics today as well. I found a GIF or a GIF. I don't know. I told my son it's a GIF, and he said no, it's a GIF. No, he's probably right. So what's going on with metaphysical realism? How does it relate to dualism? Yeah, and why is it so unsatisfactory? Who wants to? Shall I read it, or does somebody want to weigh in immediately with a thought? Okay, I'll read. I'll read. Okay, so Dubois Raymond thinks that the unperceivable atoms of matter, through their position and motion, and this is the aspect of metaphysical realism, produces sensation and feeling, and then comes to the conclusion that we can never arrive at a satisfactory explanation as to how matter and motion produce sensation and feeling. For it is indeed thoroughly and forever incomprehensible that it should not be a matter of indifference to a number of atoms of carbon, hydrogen, and nitrogen, and oxygen, how they lie and move, how they lay and moved, and how they will lie and move. There is no way to understand how consciousness could arise out of their interaction. So this is as like another way of expressing the theory of knowledge, so the limits to knowledge that are implicit in a metaphysical realism by creating this. Instead of he's instead of calling it the thing in itself, which it is, they've said, okay, this thing in itself, what we'll do is instead we'll call it position and motion. But we can never explain how position and motion translates into feelings and sensation and all these type of things. Therefore, there are limits to our knowledge, or at least that's my part of my takeaway
Yes.
why
So-
he spends quite a bit of time going into what metaphysical realism is, because it's a dualistic mindset which fails to understand the relationship between thinking and perception.
It's what we're all taught and brought up into. It's the step beyond naive realism. Naive realism just says everything I see is real, and what I think and everything else is not somehow real. And the metaphysical realism says, wonders how do those things connected, and then it posits another thing, which is behind those two, and feelings and everything, and that is supposed to determine how everything is. But as you said, Angus, there's no way, as Dubois Raymond pointed out, there's absolutely no way that we can understand how that thing in itself makes all of this, what the relationship is.
It's really childish, isn't it? Like, okay, so the real world is just a tiny version of the one that we have in front of us, and so if it's a bunch of objects, or it's a bunch of, let's say, parts, it's a bunch of bits, and if you put all the bits together, then you have a river, say. So water is just H2O. That's just that formula. It's such a childish notion that things are the sum of their parts, that reality is the sum of parts, and that if you only could had the right instrumentation, you would see that that's how it originates out of a super tiny world that is completely not visible by the human eye. But if you had the instrumentation powerful enough, you could see the way in which it actually all arises.
I think it's an interesting point you're bringing up there, Jeff, because especially when we're looking at the riddles of philosophy, what you do is you get a deeper feel and understanding for how thought has grown out of this religious consciousness, where you've got theologies, a doctrine which has been sort of the reality. It's the matter of the time. It's that strata of experience. It's like the Bible is like the basis on which all thinking is based, and then suddenly is an exaggeration, but over it's like from the 16th century on especially, we get this new scientific thinking that's giving us levels of certainty of understanding that go way beyond anything that religious doctrine subjected to thinking could. So whilst it's correct what you say about now 400 years later it seems childish, I think it's important. It's interesting to reflect back on how this process has evolved over the last 400 years. Humanity has pulled itself out of this religious, superstitious, jingoistic, not that we haven't got jingoism nowadays, but a talking in cliches and using anecdotal thinking instead of a rigorous scientific thinking. And part of the essence of that transformation is because we've got the certainty of sensory observation. So I think still a lot of people, this is one of the causes, I believe, of resistance to, it's like any talk of spiritual ideas, is because people feel the ground under their feet shifting. That which gives them a sense of certainty. People like us, annoying people like us, are saying, are you sure? There's a problem here and there's a problem there and there's a problem there. And we don't like people in general who keep pointing out holes in our thinking. But that is actually the process of science, isn't it? We've got this bedrock of, it's a bedrock actually floating on air, as we've discussed in another video, that we've got this apparent bedrock of sensorial experience. And what, through reading this book, is becoming increasingly clear is that sensorial experience, both of the outer world and of my own self, anything that can be said of it is only done through thinking, but we don't know what thinking is. We live off, so thinking is like, it's like a field that's like just grows fruit, and we have no understanding of like how it grows its fruit. It just does, it produces and produces and produces, and we don't have any insight into it. And this book is leading us into beginning to get a foothold in this activity of thinking that is really at the basis of any understanding or method of knowing the world. And it's a tough process, and I think people experience that they're losing their footing, and we lose our footing when we're trying to talk about it. If you think about the conversation, Jeff and I, that we had last week, we're still not crystal clear about intuition and mental concepts, because it's a new foreign world to us. But as we talk through these things, clarity gradually starts percolating through, and we experience a stronger sense of certainty. Yep, I feel like I've got that nailed now. And then other areas are still work in progress.
It's a powerful work up to this point. That I'm not aware. Perhaps professional philosophers in our ecosystem would be able to describe another philosopher who put the thing in and of itself to rest. I don't know of one, but if they did, I would love to read that and how they came to it, and that same thing. But the wonderful thing here, and the thing that we need to go, I believe we need to use on ourselves as we go forward, is to not let that creep in, the thing in and of itself notion, into any version of our explanations of reality, that as we see fit to put into a world picture, say. Because I could posit the spiritual world, right, that Steiner describes in detail, that would be perceivable if you could enter the spiritual world. I could posit that and make it a thing in and of itself, and then and make it unenterable, because I made it a thing in and of itself, right? Or at least much more difficult to enter into in a perceptual way. So this is a wonderful tool. So you rightly pointed out that this is metaphysical realism is an iteration of the thing in and of itself, and you don't get to do that. And it's what I'm saying is it's childish to do it, and it's childish to keep doing it. And not only is it childish, but when adults act childish, it's extraordinarily destructive. Right, that right there, that movement, half examined on a reductionist level, brought us the weaponry of self-destruction. So there are consequences to our worldview. This is what I was trying to say earlier about monism as a useful worldview, because it speaks to a plausible potential, where metaphysical realism speaks to an impossible reality, and then tries to operate in the world out of a false picture of what the world actually is. And we've seen the result. We see the result, I believe, around this.
Yes. Presumably we're asking questions that don't need to be answered, and so we're getting answers of things that we don't even need, like the ability to tear the whole planet apart.
And exactly what you're saying. He stresses, in other words, in the same chapter, doesn't he? He says that we create these imaginary false hypotheses, I think he calls them. I can't remember the exact terminology, but we're hypothesizing into empty space. We're creating a concept that doesn't even exist and saying this is the reason we have problems, because we can't know this concept that doesn't exist that we've created.
And we get tangled up, so we get tangled up because we're dealing with things that are essentially lies, whether we admit it or not. Like that political atom that you presented there. We're sort of dragged into these conversations that can go nowhere because they're not based on reality.
Yeah. And I think one of the things, because we've had a little bit of a conversation, haven't we, the three of us on WhatsApp this week, this importance of recognizing the perspective from which we're coming from, that perspective has a certain validity, but we have to recognize that there are also other perspectives that will allow us to see the same facts from a different perspective that create a bigger picture around the whole. And this is, I'm referring to we had a few messages about the beginning of chapter 6, this tree that keeps popping up in our conversation, that we fully understand people who say a tree is outside them. It's perfectly normal, but there is another way of seeing that as well, which adds a completely different dimension.
But it has to be really factual and not like a sort of rarefied hypothesis, because then, as it says here, then astonishment sets in about the fact that one cannot unfold life out of it. One cannot get any proper answer, just more questions and nothing actually fruitful.
I have a question that might be fruitful, but also might not, because we might not have the answer to it. But Max used the word hypostasize.
What was that?
And I don't know, because I just tried to look it up. I meant to look it up, spend some time looking it up. It's used. It's used in philosophy, and Wittgenstein uses it. But I looked for the definition, and it keeps going back to hypothesize. And I'm wondering if it. Well, I don't know what it means, and I don't want to look like an idiot, so I'm not going to.
It sounds like metastasize. You know what counts?
That's what I thought too. Yes, that's what I thought. Like, it takes an abstract concept and not only treats it as if it's real, but forces it into a kind of reality that you have to accept. And so
and then it grows and takes over.
Yeah, something like that. So I don't know.
I'm going to flash it up on the screen. I'm going to use this other fancy thing here. Basically, it's what's the underlying substance to reality, and that's how it's related to this metaphysical reality that posits position and motion. But let me just put it up here, because I can do it in a caption here, I do believe. Let me just edit this. So this is just from Wikipedia. Okay, so there's nothing weird going on there. So the underlying state, and every time we try to,
okay, so this is different, but to hypostasize is an activity. What
to turn something into that substance that underlies everything.
Which sounds an illegitimate activity. Is that what we're getting? Because you can't turn reality into. Do you know what I mean? Reality is reality. You can't turn it into anything. So if you're
you can create it.
But that's what the metaphysical realists try to do. Yeah. That's what they try to do with position and motion. They said this is it. If you want to understand anything, position and motion. Anything else, I think that's. Perhaps Max can inform us But that's my understanding. But picking up on that, there was also perhaps it's actually going a little bit too far. But there was another part of Max's question which I thought was really interesting. When do we know what the right concept is? And it is linked to this hypostasizing here. But I think because we aren't experts in philosophy, we're amateur philosophers, just like you had amateur scientists as well in the 16th, 17th, and 18th century. It's perfectly valid. I think I feel more comfortable just moving on unless somebody feels it's like a huge urge to contradict me.
No. But beware of the professionals, I will say.
Yeah.
in either case, whether they're scientists or philosophers.
And they can get tangled up in their own thought webs just like we do as well.
Yeah, the important point is thinking, isn't it? It's not the wielding bludgeons of concepts or anything like that. It's what they're speaking.
No, but people like Matt and Ashton and Max
Yes.
wield that professionality with a deep respect for the process of thinking of
yes,
people outside their field.
They do it helpfully, but so Jeffrey, why did you bring it up? I'm interested.
Because I had the feeling that we were getting at something here, and I think this is what we're getting at, and I think I thought this is the way Max used the word, but it doesn't really matter. What we're trying to get at is a forced reality, and that when you start with a notion of reality and then you force that to be the reality, when you torture the concept so much that you make it the reality for people, even though they might in their heart of hearts know better, then you're not only unaware of the consequences of your actions, you're guaranteeing the consequences of your actions are going to have second, third, fourth, fifth order destructive realities associated with them, because you're working contrary to nature, to go to our previous conversation with Sophia.
Yes.
If you're working contrary to the nature of things, then there'll be some consequence that is unwanted, but torturing reality in with unwarranted certainty or something like that is what I'm trying to get at. Like it's not just an innocuous theory that you can use to make a mechanical device work, like a bicycle or something. It's way worse than that, paradigmatically speaking. When your model becomes reality, when you torture it and force it to people to accept it as reality.
Yes.
For example, germ theory. The notion that it's a childish notion, and the idea of I would suggest that real scientists would say that what we have is a pleomorphic reality, right? That at the level of germs, we have states of being, or states of organic processes that are morphing from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, depending on the circumstance. Like stem cells, a stem cell could be an elongated nerve fiber, or it could be a nano micro bit of whatever. I don't even know the language.
Is that what pleomorphic means?
Well, it's what pleomorphic means at the level of microorganisms in a body. Say your microbiome is a bacteria can change into a spore, or it can become an inert object that looks like, I don't know, a virus maybe.
So did you want to say more on that subject? I just wanted to go all the way back to if the correct noun is hyperstate, then the hyperstate for knowledge of the world is perception and thinking. That's and I think, Max, please let me know if I got that wrong, but that's my best understanding of how it might be relevant to the conversation we had yesterday and today. It's without perception there is no knowing, and without thinking there is no knowing. But when the two meet together, we have erkennen, we have cognition, we have knowledge.
Hyperstate.
Hyperstate. Sounds like a ride at a theme park, doesn't it? Okay. Does anybody want to add anything before we move on to the next slide?
I do, but at time, so let's go.
Okay, right, fine. I mean, here we've covered most of this already. Actually, the naive realist regards only. Oh, this was interesting. Sorry, no, we haven't covered this. We've started to cover it. So what's going on here? This is another really important idea. That the curious thing that a realist says it's only impressions of the senses that are valid, but Steiner uses the example of the tulip as being okay. So we have a real tulip, and it blossoms and it blooms, and then it disappears, and then it's dead. So this real thing disappears, whereas the idea of a tulip, which lives within the appearance of the tulip, is something that keeps coming back. So the idea has more permanence than what realists call real. And I've written nominalism and realism because we've also got this curious fact that what we now call realism would have been called nominalism in the Middle Ages or in the time of scholasticism, and what we call idealism now would have been realism for them. So we also have to be extremely careful when we're talking about these things, but we'll stick to the modern descriptions. It's like tulips. Which is more real, a tulip that you can see, or the idea of a tulip that will come back year after year after year after year after year?
Well, that's why metaphysical realism is brought in, because people don't want to, partake of the notion that the ideal has at least as much reality as the perceived tulip, and so they will say that there's something behind the tulip that dies that is the real substance of the tulip that continues. The ideas there's nothing that to do with that. That's just some brain fog that we use to kind of try and grasp it. But so this is a very interesting point.
So if I explain the connection to the picture, as I randomly do, I put in a couple of key terms and see what images come up. And I particularly like this image because it does, for me, also capture from a slightly different angle. It's like the realism, idealism. You've got this man and this woman, a man and wife. The story is called Money Change. It's by a guy called Quentin Masia. I'd never heard of him before. But it's this lovely picture of contrasts, isn't it? This man counting the money, that which is so valuable for him. And then this woman with a book in her hand, which has is of a completely different quality to the money that he's counting. And for me, this juxtaposition of this woman's like finding so much value in the written words, like we were talking about when we read the Philosophy of Freedom earlier, that we create our own understandings, we enrich our inner lives by looking at these black figures on white pages. But for this money changer, money's real. That's far more interesting. I just thought I'd explain why I chose the picture as well.
I think it's fantastic because she's looking at a book, and there's a picture in a book, an image, and that image has the same kind of clothing, at least color and tone as her. So somehow it's reflecting something related to her, and he's focused on this this weighing and measuring, the outside thing, and then in between them there's that mirror, and reflecting that, is that the artist? There's the window.
No, I think it's actually a reflection of the window. I've got a bigger version of it.
But below the window, to the bottom right of the window, there seems to be a face in a hat, or is that something else?
I think I might be having visions, but it looks like a magic mushroom to me, or an Amanita mascara.
But anyway, if you look at the bigger, it's right in the position to reflect the artist.
And the window.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, and the outside world, and the window to the outside world. Those hands are so beautiful, aren't they?
Yes.
The angularity of them, all the rest of the features of the characters are sort of softer. Yes,
Yeah.
but the especially the man's hands there are just like aromatic almost.
Well, very bony. Our hands are a bit bony, aren't
Angular, long, angular fingers.
Yeah.
Like a witch's fingers. But
and the other way that Steiner expresses this in multiple places, and I put when I is so I'm mixing up ideas. I should try to speak more clearly. The similar argument to this tulip argument he makes in lots of other places about which is more real, the wolf, or it's like the wolf that you see, or the idea of the wolf that continually eats everything, lamb meat in his example, but never becomes a lamb, despite spending its whole life eating lambs. And I think that's an even more living example of an idea is, or what people are trying to convey with the word idea isn't this dead abstract word. No, it's a concept. It's an idea that's active, it's real, it's living, and it's continually, in the case of the wolf eating lamb, converting something that will sustain, it will obliterate the lamb essence that used to be in it and permeate it with wolf essence.
Yeah. Obviously, knowledge isn't eating, right? Because if in a sense, if we're to know something, where we do become it. That is within the context of my current point of view. That would be a posited point of view, not a real one necessarily. But therein lies the deal, right? Is that idea real? Does it have something in and of itself that, and I say in and of itself in the existential sense, not in the posited sense. Is there something in the idea that is as real as the thing that it's pointing to, say?
Yeah. One of the things I find interesting when you hear philosophers, I'm generalizing here because I haven't seen a great deal, and as I've said repeatedly, I'm not a professional. But often, when they're talking about examples of concepts, they tend to use dead concepts. That's my own impression. It's like when they're illuminating the categories of Aristotle or the four causes of Aristotle, they'll choose something dead. But actually, these concepts become a lot more interesting when you apply them to living things. What is it that's living within the wolf beyond our immediate perception that is causing all of these amazing processes to happen just to sustain its body, let alone the inner life that's going on there, which we only have a vague intimation of in the way that it behaves towards other animals. So I think it's Goethe, with his study of plants and any study of zoology as well, with these concepts of ideas being real, takes on an added dimension in a way that's not there in the dead material world. So my own personal experience.
Go on, Jeff.
Oh, I was just going to say, I guess I'll propose this going forward as well, or perhaps it will be a theme that comes back up. That with each other, with other human beings, we have a unique version of what it is to know the other, because well, the wolf has its processes, and I have many of the same processes. Plus, I'm a human being, and so we share processes that are at least, well, there's a mystery, isn't it? This is the mystery of how we're united, and how then with this. I love I love the example of knowing another human being as the possibility for knowing the world in a similar way, right? Because if I am to some extent, we're universal to each other in our processes that are universal, and there are things that are not that I am that are also very specific to me. And this is what I think what Steiner means when he says that individuals are species in and of themselves, technically, that we are species. You are a species, I'm a species. And so if I can get to know another species that is also human, the hope for getting to know in a unifying way a wolf, say, and I would think if you're if you were an indigenous person of a previous time, perhaps, or even of this time, that the idea of being separate from the wolf would be rather foreign, at least during the hunt.
Yeah. And is that because one's obviously separate from the physical wolf one's chasing after, but somehow inwardly one is connected with what we call the spirit of the wolf, and in that one's one. And I think it's really key. It's very interesting language. Like earlier, Jeff, you said that the concept of the idea pointing to the percept. But is it the other way round, that the percept, is that how we find the reality of the concepts and the ideas, and therefore how we get to know the wolf and each other and so forth? That the percept actually points to the concept. That's where the reality is at. And we can all share in those same realities. There's, my concept of triangle is the same as yours. My concept of wolf is the same as yours. My concept of Angus is the same as yours.
And they've been stimulated by something that's coming through perception, because Steiner makes this point, doesn't he, very clear and early on in the book. Even thinking initially appears as perception.
Yeah. This is
as a percept. Sorry, as a percept. I should be careful.
An added picture of this is then also to examine the senses that are doing the perceiving. So, for me, peas taste different. I'm pretty sure than they do for my son, for example.
Yeah.
And the texture feels different in my mouth and all of that stuff. But we don't disagree that they're peas.
Yes.
Even though we have completely different experiences of them. Yeah.
Yeah. So somehow your individual percepts of the peas are pointing to peas. real key. I'm going to have to go in 5 minutes. I don't know if a cat nudged my camera so it's not showing me, but anyway, I'll just quietly disappear in about 5 minutes.
Okay. We're not actually seeing you anymore, Jonathan. You
I know,
disappeared.
I know.
You disappeared into the wolf's mouth.
Yeah. I think a cat sent me.
You're becoming the wolf.
You're becoming the wolf. Oh my God.
The wolf eats you. Does it become human?
Okay. So next one. We've got three more slides. Yeah, but this is the last one to do with strictly with the chapter, half of reality. So again, he's pointing out there's a lot of repetition going on from different perspectives about this same key idea that if we've got perception, we've only got half of reality. If we've only got thinking, we've only got half of reality. It's when the two meet together, then the human longing for knowledge, the desire for knowledge, the desire to understand is complete when these two meet each other. So he says, any deepening of knowledge depends on the powers of intuition that live in thinking. This intuition can, within that experience which takes shape and is elaborated in thinking, delve down into greater or lesser depth of reality.
So the key to the answer, I guess, to the questions we posed to begin with, which is, I guess chapter 7 does, if one is realistic, leaves one with questions as to what is actually possible for knowledge to do. Intuition must be the absolute key to this whole program, this whole operational program, out of which we unify percept and concept. I mean, it lives in all cognitive processes and perceptual processes, at least potentially in the latter, but certainly in the former.
Yeah.
So it'd be good to define what the hell intuition is.
I'm going to have a go, and as you'll see, it's not a definition; it's a description from a certain perspective. When we look at something and we don't understand why something is like that, and we can observe the phenomena, but the phenomena. Sorry, let's be correct here. The percepts themselves never reveal to me that missing concept that will allow me to understand, to have knowledge of it. But this activity of thinking invisibly in me, I've got to, as an individual, dedicate thinking attention to that. So I observe the object. I take the example from yesterday. It's like I follow the movements of the different stages of transformation of a plant, from root to stem, leaves, flower, fruit, seed, blah blah blah. And there's what happens as I live into this these different percepts that are presented to me. At some stage, so I'll have my concepts. It's like a concept of a leaf already exists, and a flower, and a head, and a fruit, and all of that type of thing. But then, it's like something curious. I'll make an observation about the plant that I hadn't noticed before, and this creates. One way of describing it for me might be like an experience of a what's that? Why is that there? Type of experience. And that's where often we'll get up, I don't know. But then sometimes something comes through and we add another dimension. It might be a new concept. It might be a connection between concepts that we hadn't seen before. And this is, my current understanding, this is what intuition is. It's when out of nowhere, but it's an inner activity, I make a connection or a new concept comes into being that elucidates, that illuminates the picture. But it's like light itself is invisible. We can never see light in itself. It always has to be reflected off an object. So if you shall shoot a laser beam through space, through a vacuum, you will see nothing. But put some dust particles into that chamber, all of a sudden it's visible. And in that sense, thinking is invisible, but when we direct it like a laser beam, if you like, onto something, that reveals an aspect of it. And especially if it's something that we don't understand, it also has this capacity to how shall we say, it's like form this concept, or through reason to connect concepts that we weren't capable of having before. And then this becomes a part of let's call it our mental cupboard. Now we have access to that concept, and we can use it in lots of different situations, and we'll often experience it. My own experience of this is that, how come I didn't see that before? When you've learned something, you struggle for a while to understand. I'll make up an example. Let's say it's a differential calculus. So at school, you worked your way through this, and then it's hard work, and then you understand it, and you can turn back on yourself and sort of say, how come that was so difficult to understand? And it's difficult to put yourself back in that non-understanding way, because that concept is now a part of you. And I don't know if what I'm saying, I don't know how it sounds in other people's ears. But it's a strong experience, this. So something clicking in your thinking. And then if you go back and think, why did I find it so difficult? It's very difficult to remember why it was so difficult. It was, because you fought with that idea, but it is no longer difficult for you. This is one of the challenges that teachers face on a day-to-day basis. They know this stuff, and they've got to help their pupils to arrive at the same clarity of thinking around certain things.
Yeah, I in a way, what you're saying is intuition is a perception of concepts. Because this is interesting. I want to present an inverted picture of what intuition is as well. But first, I wanted to elaborate or celebrate actually what it is you were describing. That it's that flash of understanding that makes everything so obvious. And so on the other side of that is I know things and I don't know how I know them. Right. So it's an inversion of having worked hard and then coming to the whole idea all at once. I have the whole idea of something, but I don't know how to articulate it, or I don't even know. I don't have so on one side you have the problem of education in this time, particularly, is one of the things I hear from teachers, is that children are losing the intuition of concepts, the perception of concepts. They're having trouble perceiving concepts, right? We have a sense for that, just like we have a sense for perceiving color. We have a sense for concepts. And the reason for that, I would suggest, is that concepts are if they're living, if the concepts are living, they are themselves how do you say? You got to have living language here. So they're themselves a cell, within a coherent cellular system that is that is a compact intuition, say, but it's a living. It's not so. So concepts. The reason why we recognize them intuitively is that they are compact intuitions, say, as living forms. This is the best I can do right now for that. And so kids are having trouble sensing, essentially, concepts, perceiving concepts, intuiting concepts. And this might speak to, although we haven't had a different version of the description by Steiner, in this work he describes conceptual intuition. So there must be, I'm positing that there's other kinds of intuition rather than just conceptual intuition. There's also perhaps perceptual intuition that aren't of concepts, but are of the percept. So in a way, you could say you meet somebody for the first time and you know all there is to know, but you don't know that you know all there is to know. Or the artist writes the novel in a flash and then has to remember what that first intuition was, something like that. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think it's an interesting way of understanding also. So these somewhat contradictory experiences we have of life in our thinking. We can experience something in a flash, but unless we understand all the concepts that are involved there, it's not on a solid foundation. If we haven't worked through that process of how it's like that the larger picture, the reasoned picture, is made up of these different concepts, we can sense a lack of certainty in that. But if we have these concepts crystal clear in us and we've mapped them together, then we have no problem recreating that clarity when we're explaining it to another person. And there are so many experiences where in life of this intuition of understanding of a greater picture of what's going on, but to have that certainty that it's actually really is if let's say I call it a correct intuition as opposed to a misinformed intuition, to know the difference between those two, we again have to go back to it's like the conceptual aspects of it. They become like the building blocks.
Or cells, I would say, because
a more living example.
I would, and I also think it's probably the cells are probably consilient with what as a reality, not a metaphor. So I'll just park that one for a hot second. But I know people, and I would say that I'm going to contend that no intuition can be incorrect. But how we interpret the intuition could be incorrect. Or I know people who are extraordinarily intuitive, and many of them are do like body work or can really assess and help somebody do movement that really helps them to realign themselves or something like that. But I know of a person I'm thinking of right now who's also incredibly destructive to her environment. But she's importantly intuitive in that she can help people, but she can't follow the intuitions into a framework of thinking that reinforms her along a navigated path, say, because the intuition is maybe it's so powerful that it overwhelms her ability to provide an aim, say, because her aim is off. Like she's wrong about just about the way in which she's elaborating her intuitions are wrong of just about everybody around her, but she's also a very powerful person. It's remarkable to watch.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to this is second to last slide. This is a thought I had, and I'm not sure to what extent you've ever practiced this. You have Steiner's like 6 thought exercises. Actually, thought number 1 is this thought control, Use an ordinary object, a pencil, a cloth, clothespin. No, something's gone wrong with the spelling there. Anyway, a clip, a book, etc. And you think about it for 5 minutes every day. And this is something obviously I did a long time ago. I haven't done it like recently, but I've had occasion, because of reading this book this time, to rethink the value, a deeper value I appreciate now, of this exercise. And why do I think it's why is it suddenly taken on a new value? If I give an example, so this isn't my shower curtain, but I was in the bathroom this morning for like 3-4 minutes, and I decided to just so let's see, if I just center my thoughts on that shower curtain. So this simple, really simple object, and then I connect my thinking. All my thinking has to evolve around this shower object, this shower curtain, and I obviously identify the colors. They're all concepts. I identify different lines of symmetry. That's also a concept, symmetry. So I can see it through symmetry. How many lines of symmetry are there in this? And then I start thinking, okay, what's this curtain made of? Oh, it's nylon based. Okay, nylon based. That means it's like connected to oil, and there was oil exploration involved in the making of this curtain. This curtain was made in a factory. It was like sold in a shop. The world begins to open itself out as I pick apart this shower curtain. Now, none of that, of what I just described, apart from the colors and the lines of symmetry, is obvious to perception. And even perception itself couldn't have identified that. I required thinking to identify the colors, the concepts, and to identify the lines of symmetry and the different shapes that are going on there. But when we do this practice, we begin to see how, if we direct our attention to the concepts that we can re-identify in these everyday objects, how amazingly vivacious, full of life this process of thinking is, if we just let it. Steiner uses this word, unfurl its activity. And it really is, it's this experience of, blimey, just in those 2 or 3 minutes, so like suddenly this boring shower curtain becomes, there is so much in there. And that led me to think about how often also Steiner has this somewhat pedantic way initially of listing a load of concepts when he's giving examples. He does it countless times in this book. But I also am beginning to strongly suspect this is a very conscious ploy by him to encourage us to also be more observant, be more attentive in when we are perceiving things, how thinking is continually there with us. And if we stay at it a bit longer than just saying that's a shower curtain, but really identifying the different concepts that are also within that picture, we also come to a more living experience of this mystery that thinking is. But it becomes incarnate, it becomes full of content instead of just an abstract experience.
I just love that. I love that. I've always had an affinity for that exercise, and in some ways I could explain why, but you just sent me into a world of wonder in a certain sense, and you could say that, like say Chad in our group who speaks about archetypes, you could say it sends you off into archetype land. I mean, I don't like the word archetype. For my personally, I think it's Kate mentioned in Bali, that it's a static kind of word, and
Mhm.
and um, and I'm not cold to it; I'm warm to it. But it does send you into these sort of essences of things, which are what I think what part of what we were talking about a minute ago about intuitions, and it's a narrative. And the world tends to then start telling you stories, in a sense, or you start perceiving stories. And this goes to some of the people who think archetypally, like when he's effective, Jordan Peterson is a good archetypal thinker, and some others like Vervaeke who use symbol as a device for unlocking. No, and then you can go around and use archetypes to unlock archetypes, and it can become abstract, but not if you stay with the pencil, not if you stay with the percept. When that's the part of the thing that is so wondrous about this exercise, and that why it's so important that it is a sort of insignificant inanimate object rather than trying to take up a tree to start out with, that, but it sends you off into, oh, I don't know, like I'll do like a table or a chair, or a table, say, because tables used in philosophy of freedom, so that was one I picked up at one
Yeah.
point. And then it takes you into what the origination of tables were. How were they invented? They were probably laps to begin with. They were probably your legs, or they were the ground, or whatever. But there's a universalizing process that just sort of starts to take off, and universal concepts relate to universal concepts and start talking to each other in a way.
Yeah.
And it's a flowing narrative, as long as you maintain relationship with the percept and you don't go into a belief system about the subatomic particles that make up pencils.
Exactly. And I had an experience yesterday with a good friend of mine. We were talking about noses, and there's a real joy. I mean, these thought exercises are supposed to be done, it's like on your own, but actually when you're in really good company, it can become even more fascinating, because you're getting somebody else's takes. Like you that concept, you might not have brought that. Coming back to your table, you might not have brought that concept to the table that you're talking about, but somebody else, you go, oh yeah, of course. So it can be an enriching process in itself. But I wanted to. So go on.
It's also a process that I just took on your pronunciation of the word process. Pretty soon I'll be
You'll be fluent in English.
You are in trouble, mister. It's as opposed to that American thing you do with that language. What was I thinking? Oh, I forgot, but it doesn't matter. It was universal.
I was thinking there was also something else you said which I liked. You were talking about table. I know it seems to have gone. It's disappeared off into thought space, wherever that is. Shall we move to the last slide?
Yes, this has been quite a little journey today.
Yeah. So this is Mr. William Blake. I love William Blake because he's also a guy who thinks like us, to see the world in a grain of sand and eternity in an hour, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
The macrocosm in the microcosm, which is also what you can see in a shower curtain if you look long enough, as long as you keep bringing it back there. I've chosen this picture today as it's a strong picture, isn't it?
Yeah.
And what do I like about it, and how does it relate to this chapter? Well, I think I see it as what happens to a person that has impoverished thinking. Hegel in chapter 1, it wasn't it? End of chapter 1, I believe, or was it the end of chapter 2? Thinking is that which can raise man above his animality, his bestiality. It's also that which can drag us down if we don't cultivate it, if we don't refine it. I think we can return back to that animal stage. And I see this image it's called Nebuchadnezzar by William Blake, and it's rooted in the story of Daniel interpreting Nebuchadnezzar's dreams. There's a second dream. It's a less well-known one. It's not the feet of clay dream. It's the dream of a tree trunk that Nebuchadnezzar has, and Daniel interprets it and saying, "Look, this is telling you, Nebuchadnezzar, it's like you need to." It says on the left here, "Renounce your sins by doing what is right, and your wickedness by being kind to the oppressed." So he was this real thug of a ruler. So he had all his hanging gardens of Babylon, but didn't give two hoots about sort of the well-being of his citizens. Reminiscent of current times, perhaps as well. And so he didn't, of course. He didn't reform his thinking. He didn't reform his feeling life. He didn't use those to inform his will, and he was driven away from the people and ate grass like the ox. His body was drenched with the dew of heaven until the hair grew like feathers of an eagle and his nails like the claws of a bird. And you can sort of see these bird-like claws on his feet here. But there's a real tragedy in here, is that so like if we don't cultivate our thinking, if we don't understand this amazing mystery that lives within us, and it's with us every waking moment, it can also be that force which becomes perverted by, let's call them, evil powers, and will take us back to a form of bestiality, the one that Hegel said we could free ourselves from. It could enslave us even more into it.
Yeah, this is terribly beautiful. The one, and I think you're right to bring it at this time too, because of choices we make as relates to whether we'll be more human or we will devolve if we don't take up the fullness of our faculties. I was thinking as you were talking, I wonder what intuition inside feeling looks like, because it seems to be inherently our that which originates everything we know to be true, including that which we perceive without fully understanding what it is that we're in relationship with. And if we don't cultivate that, I've often thought we'd be heading in a subhuman direction, and it wouldn't be just animalic; it would be worse, because it would be human still.
Yeah.
And we think, we could do it, and with transhumanism, and we can do it super tidy by using various technologies to make us more upright. But if it's contrary to our nature, to sort of bring it full circle, it's probably going to look more like Blake's vision. We probably should be trusting the poets rather than the technocrats,
the scientists. Yeah.
Yeah.
Should we leave it there for today?
Yeah. Yes. It was an odd day today.
I'll press end of recording. Hold on a second.
Yeah. All right.